Welcome to the AI Talk Show. I'm Asha Saxena, founder and CEO of World Leaders in Data and AI. If you're joining us live on LinkedIn right now, I'm genuinely glad that you're here. We do this every week. We try to bring exciting conversation from our community to make sure that we bring real experiences right here to you. I am a professor at Columbia University. I've spent 35 years in the intersection of data, technology, and also the enterprise transformation. I feel like throughout those years, you get to experience a lot. And I've seen how the industry has changed. I've written 3 books, and I think during my time of writing the books, I got a chance to talk to a lot of businesses, a lot of leaders to really understand what is challenging when organizations are going through transformation, and especially the transformation of digital and AI. I also run an invitation-only organization, as I said, World Leaders in Data and AI. It's senior leaders in data and AI who come together to really talk about what's happening in the world, in the real world of these transformation, really real problems of artificial intelligence. And I do this show because I believe this is the most valuable channel on LinkedIn to be able to talk to leaders and the audience to have this unfiltered access to people who are actually doing the work. Not a keynote style. I think we get to hear a lot of keynote style. We get to hear a lot of panels, but really the real version. And when I'm thinking about the question, and we've heard a lot in the conferences, the report McKinsey came out with, that only about 70 to 80% of digital transformation initiatives fail. And we talk about why they fail. They fail because they can't provide the value. And the number is not meaningful if we think about it, because this number has changed over time. And we talk about the value versus technology for many decades. We talk about, can truly technology provide value? And now we're talking about AI. So what I have to ask is really, what is the bottleneck? Why do these technology projects fail? Why so much of them fail to provide the value? And it's not clear that is it technology or is it truly the leadership? The technology is just one piece, but I think how we execute these projects becomes challenging. It's challenging because it could be about culture. It could be about how we bring the people along. Technology can only do so much. But today, to have these discussions, I'm really excited that I have a guest here who've spent more than 20 years inside these problems, not just studying it, not just advertising about it or talking about it, but really holding himself, his organizations accountable. He was the divisional CIO of Wells Fargo, Charles Schwab, and he's really the person responsible for creating enterprise data at scale now. He's watched over 2 decades at every new generation of data technology, relational databases to Hadoop to cloud. And we all have gone through these changes, but I was really excited when I was talking to you, Ashish, about your career, your journey. So before I go further, I want to welcome you to this show and want to dig deep into your career, your experiences, but also your learning and your failures. So Ashish, with that, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Asha. I'm really excited about this conversation. Looking forward to it.
So before we get started, you've had a really great journey as your professional journey. I would love for the audience who's listening to really hear about your journey from where you started to where you are today at ServiceNow.
Oh, at ServiceNow. Yeah, so I joined ServiceNow about a little bit more than 2 years ago. And initially, I took a foreign assignment in India to really elevate the understanding of our brand and technology and the type of solutions that can be enabled, and elevate the relationships with the strategic institutions in India. And did that for about 2 years, and really very happy about that experience and what the team was able to accomplish there. And it's only getting better. And for the last 2 months, I've been back in the US, back at home in Austin, doing the same thing in the Americas.
So, what has been your learning while doing it in a country where hyperscalers are there? There are tons of competition in service providers. What was your experience working right there in South Asia, in India? What was it there? And when you come back here, what is the difference? What are you seeing? What are the trends? And what was your learning?
That's a great question. Each geography has its idiosyncrasies, and yet there's some underlying commonalities. So there's three things that come to mind in terms of what I saw in India that was different and how that's really helping from a learnings perspective. One is brand awareness. Like the brand awareness in the US is much higher than in India. And so when you're meeting with customers within the US, there's a level of assumed credibility, right? It's earned over the past few years, several years. But in India, since it's been a shorter journey and we're not as well known, so as a result, we have to earn it from the ground up. And now, as we look at what's happening with the whole age of AI, those lessons are really coming in handy as we talk about the newly invigorated and reimagined platform that ServiceNow is, which is now a native AI platform. So that's one. The second is India. Indian companies have been frugally innovative. They use a term called jugaad in Hindi, and it's often celebrated, and it should be.
Mhm.
Um, but what happens is when you're looking at these kind of seismic changes, that muscle memory sometimes gets in the way to think strategically. And so, what we really needed to do in those conversations and those relationships was really talk about those structural long range decisions that needed to be made, but we needed to ground them in the here and now. So it wasn't too much of a conflict with the way that decisions are made. And the third thing that comes to mind is the cost dynamics. Very different economy, different context. And so, the the way that we may approach a conversation in the US, say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and that's changed, um, is different. And so we needed to elevate the transformational discussion. It had to impact CFO metrics, revenue, margin expansion, EBITDA, those type of things. And I find that to be extremely useful coming back to the US in elevating the conversation like that, because that's where the attention is. So I feel like it was a great way to kind of transition from industry into ServiceNow and start working with customers.
You know, um, when you talk about India or US, and I'm sure you're going to see that now that you're here, uh, the questions around transformation probably remains the same. And your journey in your past career have been about building transformation when you were a CIO, in the industry. Uh, when you move from the CIO role, traditionally working in a industry, there are different challenges. And when you're here with ServiceNow, you're going in and advising, being a true advisor. What is the difference? I mean, sometimes you feel like executing yourself is a lot harder and advising is very easy because you can give an advice, you can tell what the best practice is, and you walk away. But how do you really measure that tangible metrics, tangible shift that really happens? I've noticed, I'll tell you a story that I've noticed on panels when I'm on the panels or at leadership events. Uh, when you ask a CEO or a CIO or a CDO, are you transforming? And the answer usually is yes, we are. But when you ask for what has changed, people go quiet. And you're walking into these rooms every day, every week. You're sitting across some of these large companies in the world, and they're saying I need transformation, and you're describing your job, you're listening first. um, how do you figure out from your learning, your experience, because you were in those shoes, to now where you are, kind of advising and trying to get that change happen?
Yeah, so I think first thing I try to understand is the motivation. Is it about getting points on the board that we launched n number of use cases using AI? Uh, and if it is, I try to shift it. I try to shift it to an outcome and really push to understand that outcome, and the reason behind that outcome. Is it a financially motivated outcome, regulatory? Is it an existential type of a thing in that industry? Like, what's really behind that? And then, once we are at a point of understanding that motivation for transformation, then we can really make sure that it's aligned to how the company makes money, increases earnings, and that sort of thing. And by doing that, what happens is the initiatives actually stick, right? It's not a flavor of the month type of a thing. It actually sticks because it gets the support from the overall organization, because the operating model actually then it kind of gels within the operating model. So that's the first thing, is really understand the motivation. The second one is challenge. Like, I want to understand what is challenging them from getting to that target. And usually they know what's getting in the way, but it's really a conversation of developing a level of trust. So they really kind of dig deep, because I think oftentimes understanding the problem is halfway to solving the problem.
Yeah.
Right. So that's really important. And the third one is more psychological. I like to understand their ability and willingness to actually make it happen. So, like, how aligned is the organization to the outcome and the aspiration that they have? And do they want it badly enough? And if not, then I go back to the motivation and say, you know what, I think maybe we're focusing on something, we need to focus on something different or bigger.
Have you seen organization? Everybody talks about AI first or AI native, or yes, we are ready for the transformation. But when you actually go sit in the boardrooms and you're talking to the C-level executive, they're saying, "Oh, it's just another IT project. Oh, why are we spending so much time on it?" It's to an organization where really they see AI as a strategic shift, not just an IT project. What are you seeing mostly in the organizations, and where do you see the benefit of either or approach, and what's working?
Oh, I do see sincere acknowledgement and prioritization around AI being a central priority. It's about, how do I get started? Where do I actually apply this? Because the good thing is that because of the consumerization of AI through ChatGPT and others, people know what this is, right?
Yeah.
And so they can themselves kind of see, oh, there's manifestation and there's more that I don't even know. So, one of the things that our team does when we meet with the customer, and we've gone through these kind of conversations, is we become a little bit prescriptive, in that we'll give an option that ranges across cost, risk and compliance, and revenue. We may even, depending on the ambitious and the culture of that organization, talk about new business models, right? New revenue streams. So we put those out there as a spectrum of where we could, start or accelerate. And usually they have some ideas already, right? So there's some resonance that we can dig into. The other good thing is that we're working with virtually every large institution in the world. So we have plenty of examples to draw from. Oh, you're in the pick an industry, automotive space. Here's what we've done with your peers that are larger, smaller, similar geographies or different ones. And so that gives them a little bit of confidence that this could actually work and that this could apply to them, right? So it really depends on, so we lay all this out and then we find the area that resonates. And it resonates because it's something that they've been wanting to do, but they felt like the physics weren't available for them to make it happen. And now the physics are there. So that's kind of what we do.
So that's really interesting, Ashish, because what you're seeing is organizations really hungry for understanding how AI can be used for P&L, to really for
Abs-
growth, for strategy, which is really
Absolutely.
interesting because I've seen otherwise too, where organizations are just using it as a IT project. But I think the organization who are really thinking about P&L and thinking about how to change the business model are the ones who are going to take the lead.
They are. And I think, to your point, Asha, it is a normal distribution type of a
Yeah.
thing in terms of, early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards, that type of a distribution.
Yeah.
So depending on where the company is, where the industry, the company, the individual is, you meet them where they are. So if they are, say, on the latter part of that adoption curve, you meet them on more operational things. So it doesn't freak them out, but it is stretching their boundary of what was possible. And they're like, oh my God, I can
Right.
reduce this in terms of my costs, or I can get this hassle activity out of the way for this operation, or whatever it might be, right?
Right.
And then they work themselves up. And so it depends on the part of the continuum that you're working with.
Right. And that makes sense. But I want to, I truly feel that I'm a AI optimist. I was having a conversation earlier with my CEO group, and they were talking about, they said, actually, we were reading your book, and you talk all a lot about how AI can be used for business growth and business. He said, what about all the risk? And I said, I do talk about it, only one chapter though. I mean, I do believe there's a lot of risk, responsible AI, ethical AI, privacy, security, with new models coming out. There is a danger. I mean, there's definitely risk to our data, to our organization. But beyond that, there's also, I think about the risk if the data is not right. Think about Bank of America, Erica. I use that when I'm working with the Bank of America teller, which is, trying to just get my statements. And tens of millions of people use it, right? It can check your balances, dispute a charge. It can tell you if your bill is overdue or due. So that is impressive. And I like that part about having an engagement with Erica. But if you try asking Erica something that actually matters, so think about refinancing my house, or, do I have a variable mortgage coming due? And I just had a medical expense, what should I do? Like, make it really complicated. Can I throw a few caveat in when you're talking to Erica? It won't be able to answer. So it's not smart because the data behind isn't connected enough. The systems are not talking to each other, and the data is not available to the model. It gets stuck. You've watched this over 20 years, where you have said, that every generation of data technology, relational databases or Hadoop or cloud, the output will always be the same. If the same dashboard, it's a same report if you don't really work with that data. So what is genuinely different right now? Not not like a fluff version, but real version. How is it different? How is AI truly going to change with all the data problem, the plumbing problem?
Yeah. So great point. And there's a lot to unpack. I'll try at least some of it. Data, if you look at pretty much any organization that has like data organization, the data sits on a separate architecture. It is distinct from the business application architecture. In fact, vendors have sold it in that way. I'm not saying it's wrong or right, it's just how it is. Data teams oftentimes are organized separately, and they're sometimes at arm's length from business functions, right? So, if you're familiar with Conway's law, you know, architectures resemble the communication of an organization, which is inherently the organizational structure. So that's what we've got with data. But now, since data is the fuel for AI, businesses are redefining their work with AI as a core enabler, right? I want AI as a core enabler for the redefinition of my work. So now data, which is the fuel, it can no longer just be on some ivory tower.
Right.
its role is now front and center for competitiveness, profitability, and compliance. So that is the shift. That has a lot of ramifications from a not only architecture, but also from an operating model, organizational design, and also even release management, right? And fortunately, there are technologies now, some of which we have at ServiceNow that actually help cut through some of this and actually make it happen. So that's I think that's the shift, and it's a forcing function. AI has become a forcing function to finally bring this to congeal.
Yeah, I think you had said during your prep call, data as the first class citizen. You
Yeah.
really need to build the mindset of having the first class data becoming the first class citizen, if you like it or not. And I think the organization who are ill prepared to behave in the first class fashion are the one who might have to question. Uh, for CIO who are sitting in the audience who are listening to us, and and what would you say to them? What does treating data as a first class citizen actually look like? Or not Monday, maybe Tuesday morning, not in a strategic document on a Tuesday morning when you know how would this data could break inside the organization when it's not treated like that.
So, I think let's first define what I mean, at least by first class citizen. I think very simply, it's what we pay great attention to get right. That's
Yeah.
a first class citizen. So historically, that would be the case for UI design, infrastructure, resiliency, business logic of an app, right? With AI supplanting a lot of that, what would be otherwise business logic, the data that feeds AI must automatically rise to a first class status, right? It's supplanted business logic in the right use cases. So it was the exhaust and it is now the fuel. That's the shift. So considerations for things like its provenance, quality, integrity, appropriate usability, they're no longer just some data governance team that reports on these things. Because if it breaks, you get the wrong decisions, ranging from hallucinations to biases, right? And with the wrong decisions employed within actual real-time workflows or workflows in general, you get the wrong actions, which can not only impact efficiency at scale, but also customer interactions. So that's what the CIO, that's why I think they start caring.
Right. Right. No, I think it always comes from the customer, right? If you the that's the need you need to serve. But I think there's also a freezing moment. I also hear a lot of people say that you need a executive sponsorship if you need to get started. But somebody says, "Oh, wait, no, 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 you need your data in order first." And then there's a like, "No, no, no, wait, you need governance framework before you build anything." So, and they all are right, right? Yes, you need the executive sponsorship. Yes, you need the data in order. Yes, you need the governance. Everybody's right. But if you really think about it, that becomes the freezing moment that you get freeze because you don't know where to start. So if not that, then what? Where do you actually start? What does the minimal viable foundation look like in an organization that want to move without waiting for that perfect moment and not freezing because they don't have this or that?
Yeah, I think, Asha, oftentimes there's this cognitive bias called availability heuristic.
Yeah.
And what that is it's about, you're a professor of AI. It oftentimes leads to focusing on high stakes scenarios while overlooking less critical applications where AI can deliver substantial value at much lower risk. So what I try to do, and I did this, as a practitioner, I do this with customers, is use a very simple, big, you know, value versus effort kind of a view of different opportunities. And you go where the sweet spot is, where you have higher value and lower effort. And effort isn't just the straight line functional development of the technology. It's all the effort around governance, around non-functional and other things. So when companies just get started doing it. Now, I'm not saying you don't need anything at all to start. Obviously, you need some critical mass of technology, of skills, of governance, but you can do a lot. I think you can stretch a lot with principles, patterns, frameworks, and the initial critical mass, and pair that with a higher value, relatively lower risk kind of a use case, you can get started. Now, when you get started, you not only see that outcome of that financial value, but you also start to build organizational muscle. They start to understand the technology of AI, the uses of AI, the governing of AI, and as they work through, they can get to the higher effort items or use cases, and they inherently manifest and solve for the enablement that we talk about, sponsorship and governance and all those kinds of things in a very practical, grounded, organic manner in their institutional context, right? So you're able to finally break through, and you didn't realize even how you did it because it was somewhat of an organic. Now, I know I'm overly simplifying, but these are kind of patterns that I've seen personally. And this is, I think, transcendent to AI. This works for any kind of transformation. But I think it's even more important because the velocity and acceleration of change is much higher, and the industries and market forces are going to demand that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And when the organization starts, this is a story which I hear a lot, is that, I'm sure people who are listening might recognize this story. Company announces an AI strategy, top-down mandate, big kickoff. Everyone gets access to the tool. 6 months later, usage number look fine on the dashboard, but nobody can tell you what actually changed, how works get done. So I know we spoke about push and pull, you spoke about, what really works in the organization. When you think about the difference, how does the pull is better than the push? Or, an example maybe from your background, I mean, you get to see all these organizations. A real example, what did the team do to create that pull with the AI, that really worked? What problem were they solving, or how did it start?
So I think, let's use data as an example. And I've seen this multiple times. Instead of boiling the ocean to get it perfectly conformed, the data could perfectly conform so it can support AI use cases a year from now. As I mentioned, technology is now available because this is 2026, right? There's a lot of really amazing technology, and we have some of these tools it's available for you to not boil the ocean, but boil the teacup to solve high value use cases. So as you solve more use cases, you automatically start to crowdsource the demand for those things that usually you thought you had to do before you could do anything, like data management. And because you're crowdsourcing it, you now fund and prioritize where the data is actually most needed, what the data that is most needed, where it's coming from, and so on and so forth. So you create a critical mass, and you start a pull versus a push, and that creates this flywheel situation. That then you can look, once you have enough of that, then you can look at the next stage and say, you know what, to get a step function, maybe now we do a little bit, because we're more intelligent about it, of work before a priori, as opposed to always delivering on a particular, driven by use cases alone. So I think there's a balance to these things. Usually, where I see companies or teams get stuck is they either take one end, which is boil the ocean, or they take the other one, which is just solve the use case, hook and crook, right? There's a balance to this, But I always like to balance, I like to position more on the latter one after doing a little bit of, and then have a kind of an iterative feedback loop on the investment upfront versus just the use cases.
Yeah, they always say, do that quick win, show some
Yeah,
success before you move forward. You know,
absolutely.
I have to tell you, I was talking to my son over the weekend. He's in graduate school and he runs a small hospitality business on the side. And he was saying that over the weekend, he built an agent. I call it Louis. Louis manages his invoicing, collection, bookkeeping, all of it. And he's like showing me on his texting him, and bookkeeping is getting done. And I'm like looking at him and thinking, a small business can so quickly implement AI and implement in either bookkeeping, your reports, your marketing, building marketing agent, and can really run this entire financial operations by an agent. And he's only one man shop, one man company. Now, so if the graduate student can do this on the side business, now you're hearing these stories, and suddenly your business user in Fortune 1000 companies are saying, can we see the results overnight? Which is hard because in large company, it's so hard to move these things along. Compliance, auditability, scaling projects, it's completely different. So when you really think about starting with a real problem, building it, and seeing actually a change, you know, there are lots of hurdles in large organizations. You've seen enterprise version stories. You've seen companies in probably last 12 months who've actually gotten it right.
Yeah,
Maybe they've moved slowly, but they've gotten things right and genuinely changed using AI. Um, if you have to think about, a story that puts a smile on your face, maybe you don't have to tell the name of the company if you don't want to, but maybe a real story, just so that we understand, was it a top-down decision? Was it a use case? What was a success looks like when an organization is creating or working with AI?
absolutely. So I'll give an example. It's a large US-based insurance company. They were a first mover with Gen AI, and they did exactly what we were talking about earlier. They focused on more of the back office functions, right? They knew that everybody could tell that Gen AI can help summarize, put in the right workflows. It could really help in terms of the efficiency of customer service agents and also the customer experience, right?
Yeah.
Along with other things. And then paired with a digital experience, now you're able to create efficiency at two levels. The third level is now that it's digital, you're able to have an audit trail. With that audit trail being in a financial services context, that's huge. That's something you didn't have before, right? That was painful to do when you had to go through a second line exam or an audit or something like that. So now it's the work and it's the compliance aspect that has gotten streamlined and much more efficient. With that, they were able to build that internal organizational muscle and move along that change management curve and actually hone in their internal operating model to actually solve problems across silos. Because we talked about data as a silo, but there are also other silos, right? And when
Yeah.
we think about how business actually runs, it doesn't just run in these stovepipes of departments that are in an organizational chart. It cuts across them. So with that, they were able to solve it. So they said, okay, you know what? This is not theoretical. We have done this. They invested in their teams and change management. And last year, they declared their goal to be more ambitious. They wanted to solve claims management, which is a huge, meaty part of what insurance companies do. And it's very complicated. And you can imagine the complexity in terms of the efficiency that it can unlock, the customer experience, which then leads to loyalty,
Yeah.
right? Which also has to have all the compliance and everything to make sure that you're doing that fairly and properly. Um, Happy to say they've launched this. And what we did was around working with them, we built a really clear business case that was grounded in their business outcomes and not just tech POCs. And they have now automated 7 million processes a year in this domain.
That's incredible. I think those are the stories which you want to hear because that
Absolutely.
gives you hope and that shows
Absolutely.
you that
And there are
that's
more
possible.
stories, Asha. There are more stories. It's unfortunately, um, it's not what is being publicized as much as it should. And I think it's great when you can because you think about the toil that the employees are doing that is not why they signed, why they went to college and why they're working there, right? But they have to do this stuff. Um, and when I meet with customers, and I meet with customers at least once a week, and we talk about like what is the operational debt complexity that is in their industry. And we go through it, and they're like, yeah, we have this. There are no silver bullets, but there are lead bullets to make each one of them significantly improve. It's a matter of where do you want to start.
Yeah.
And you don't have to make it perfect. You have to make it better. It has to be better enough that there's an ROI. And right now, the technology is there, but I'll tell you, it's the worst it'll ever be. It's only going to get better.
That's great. That's really great. And I think as a technology optimist, that's what we want. We
Yeah.
know, we believe in the power of the technology. But for the viewers, I want to make sure that we can flip it also.
Hmm.
I think it's great to hear the success stories, but more than that, the cautionary stories actually teach you lessons. Those are the ones which you actually learn from. You watch companies spend enormous amount of money on transformation initiative, and that has never. And there are probably some stories where they have not delivered results.
Yeah.
What is the most expensive mistake in terms of time, money, people you've watched a company make when trying to transform with AI? And you
Yeah.
again,
So,
don't tell us
yeah.
the company, but tell
No,
us what you've seen.
let me give you the anti-pattern, right? And that anti-pattern is usually something you mentioned earlier, a tech project,
Yeah,
a tech-oriented approach to AI, and which then oftentimes, then I'm seeing, unfortunately, some teams falling into this now, and we try to help them and not fall into the quicksand that they are traversing. It is, do it yourself for everything is a common trap because the technology is very interesting, very alluring, especially for technical people. And but if you're not in a tech industry context and you have large IT budgets and teams, there is a higher likelihood to fall into this, right? Not that everybody does, but that's where I see more of that happening when it does happen. Because the pace, I'm sorry.
no,
Uh,
no, no. I agree with you. I was just going to
yeah,
say that that is what I've seen too.
you've seen the
That
same thing.
yeah, because when you put it in the IT project, give it to the IT people, and not really turning that into a business problem, there's no
It's
connect. There's you lose the
and what also happens, Asha, is that when you don't put it in the business, it becomes IT for the sake of the coolness of the IT. And this has always been dangerous. It's extremely dangerous with AI. The reason is there are several reasons. One is the pace of change at every layer of the AI stack is too fast.
yeah,
If you just think, for example, just take one of the layers, the model leadership. The model leadership is changing every 3 to 4 months, right? So you think about the eval that you need to do for these models, contextualized for the type of workflows and use cases. It's going to be different, right? Think about the enormous amount of skills and attention and work that goes to just the evals. Forget about the scaffolding that's needed for each one of these. And to keep that current, oh my God, you have to be in the space of tech, in the space of AI to actually be able to do that. So for a large company with large tech budgets to say that I'm going to actually do it myself and go really deep, I think it doesn't make it is a recipe for some risk. So what I recommend is, if there's that much appetite, is to look at this um, on areas where they really want to have core competency. Even then, they have to rely on a hyperscaler. They have to make some decision, right? You can't not have some level of lock-in. It's the level of lock-in that you're talking about. So focus in on those areas, but don't avoid the other ones. Leverage a higher level in the stack and get innovation, get more of your organization involved, because they can be more involved, right? Because you can have, just as we talk about data citizens, you can have AI citizens that are solving problems at a higher level in the stack, while you can go deep and maybe on a few other areas where you really want to be innovative for the industry itself, and you maybe want to monetize even the tech itself.
Right. And great pointers. I want to go back to actually a credibility question. You as an advisor, you get a chance to meet with a lot of organizations, talk to them, see their journey, see successes, see failures, learn from them. But when you talk about ServiceNow, or credibility, are you doing it yourself? ServiceNow made it public commitment that fully AI native company by end of the year, not AI assist, but really AI native, which I think is so incredible. HR plus agents, sales plus agents, no human using AI tools, but AI kind of woven into how work actually gets done. So tell me your version. What does that look like from inside your own team right now? What has changed? What has been harder than you expected? Just a real story. How is your organization moving in that direction?
Absolutely. I think you said it really perfectly. Um, we must be the torchbearers if we are to sell the torch. And we do drink our own champagne. We have internal access to the tech that we GA 2 to 3 months earlier. And we have a team that is focused on understanding that tech and then applying that tech appropriately within the organization. And that that activity of applying it internally is called Now on Now. Our ticker is NOW. So we have a Now on Now program, and we have every function has Now on Now practitioner, from CISO to risk to HR to finance to IT itself to sales. I'll give you an example. We just announced the launch of autonomous workers. Okay. And we'll be announcing that more broadly in our conference in about 12 days from this time of this recording at Knowledge. And so what is different between agentic AI and autonomous workers is that agentic AI is great. You can build level of agency in a workflow. Autonomous, you actually get the outcome, right? So we deployed this, and we deployed it first for service management, L1 service management.
Right.
90% of the work is now being done by this agent. 90%.
Wow.
When you look at these type of examples, cumulative over the span of the last year, we're looking at $385 million hard costs published, reported to externally that we have realized. We have a framework that we share with customers on how we're measuring this in case that helps them. And we also bring those practitioners who are actually running the company inside in front of customers and consult with them to say, okay, how are you actually making it work? And so that there, it's not just we're eating the cooking, we're also helping others who are in the kitchen learn how we cooked it so that they can cook it in their kitchen.
That's really, really interesting. I mean, we can go completely on a tangent and talk about the workforce, but I want to ask you, as we're coming to the end, I want to talk about end this session about some kind of a gift to the audience. given everything you are seeing right now, the pace of the technology, the pressure leaders are under, which they truly are, and there's a gap between AI, what it's promising to what it's delivering, what's actually delivered inside most organizations. What is the one question that every leader should be asking right now that almost none of them are asking?
Well, I don't know if none of them are asking, but I'll tell you more should be asking. Let me put
Yeah,
it this way. I feel the question should be, what value can I deliver now and know that I will retain the optionality of what will be commoditized, right? Because the only reason you wouldn't make a decision is because you feel like it would be a bad decision because maybe this will be solved for later on in a different way. So solve for what can be delivered now and retain the optionality for what can be commoditized. So your data, your security, your unique workflows, your context around all of this cannot be commoditized.
right.
The infrastructure, perhaps the LLMs, these are maybe the places where you want to have optionality. So don't fall in the trap of wanting to control everything. Stay focused on the question of where I can add outsized value. That's what I would say.
I love that. I think just knowing where you can control and can make the impact is really important. Ashish, I started this show because I believe that the most valuable thing we can do for our leaders right now is to give them access to people who actually are doing it, who are in the rooms of where action is happening, just the real version, the real stories, uh, and also talk about the mistakes and successes, talk about the framework, talk about their lessons from their failures and successes. And you gave all of that to us today. I want to thank you so very much for being honest, being humble, and so openly sharing with the audience of what's working, what's not working, and keeping it real. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Asha. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. And for everyone who joined us, if something from the conversation is going to change how you think, please share it. Tag a colleague, bring the best you can to where you are, bring others up. I think that's what we say in Builder, uh, the World Leaders Organization, is that it is the power of peer-to-peer community, helping somebody else to get ahead. Uh, and also what you learn, bring it to your next leadership conversation. The only way these ideas actually move is when people like you are carrying them forward. I'm Asha Saxena. This is AI Talk Show from World Leaders in Data and AI. We'll see you next episode. Thank you for joining us today.
All right.